The Senate hearing was supposed to be routine, but the atmosphere shifted the moment Rand Paul turned his focus on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Known for his fiery outbursts, Paul leaned into the microphone, his voice sharp and accusing. "You clearly don't understand the law, Congresswoman," Paul snapped, pounding the table. "Maybe you should go back to law school before you try lecturing me." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Cameras zoomed in as Paul's words echoed. The exchange seemed one-sided, until Crockett calmly adjusted her microphone, a quiet smile forming on her face. "Senator Paul," she began evenly, "it's interesting you'd say that. Because I came prepared today." She reached into her folder and pulled out a small device. "Perhaps the committee, and the American people, should hear something you'd rather keep quiet." The room froze. Paul's face tightened as Crockett pressed play. A recording filled the chamber. It was Rand Paul's own voice, captured from a private conversation. On the tape, Paul admitted to blocking certain bills, not because of principle, but because, in his own words, it makes good television to stir chaos. The committee erupted. Senators who moments ago sat in silence now whispered frantically. Reporters typed furiously. Paul's eyes darted around, his usual confidence gone. Crockett leaned forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "So before you lecture me about the law, Senator, maybe you should explain why you treat the Senate floor like a reality show." The room went dead silent. Paul, red-faced, tried to interrupt, but the damage was already done. Clips of the tape began hitting social media within minutes. The hashtag secret tape showdown trended instantly. By the time the hearing ended, it wasn't Paul's fiery outburst that made headlines, it was Crockett's calm reveal. Commentators across the spectrum declared it a political masterclass, the moment Jasmine Crockett turned an attempted humiliation into a viral takedown. Rand Paul had exploded. But Jasmine Crockett's secret tape had humiliated him instantly, on live television, in front of the nation. As the chamber buzzed with murmurs, Rand Paul slammed his hand on the desk. "This is outrageous. That recording is taken out of context," he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. But Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair, calm and collected, letting Paul's anger echo off the walls. The cameras caught every twitch of his frustration, every bead of sweat gathering on his forehead. "Out of context?" Crockett repeated, her tone sharp but controlled. "Senator, those were your words. Clear as day. And they reveal exactly what you think of your duty here." The committee chair tried to restore order, but it was useless. Senators on both sides couldn't hide their reactions. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others scribbled notes furiously. The press gallery above leaned over the rails, their cameras flashing non-stop. Paul attempted to steer the conversation back to policy, but every sentence he spoke sounded defensive, desperate. Crockett seized the opportunity. "Let's talk about context," she said firmly, sliding another document across the table. "Here's the voting record, your voting record. Bill after bill blocked, not because of content, but because it suited your political theater. The evidence was undeniable. Every page lined up perfectly with what the tape revealed. Crockett's timing was flawless, her delivery devastating." Paul leaned back, visibly shaken. For once, the senator who prided himself on controlling the narrative found himself trapped by his own words. And Jasmine Crockett? She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. Her composure was the knockout punch. The hearing had turned from a lecture into a live political takedown, and everyone in the room knew it. By the next morning, the fallout had already begun. News networks replayed the clip of Jasmine Crockett's calm reveal on an endless loop. The tape of Rand Paul's private admission became the most shared video across every major platform. On social media, hashtags like #CrockettExposedPaul and #Tapegate trended at the top. Memes surfaced within hours, Rand Paul's angry face paired with captions like, "This is out of context," while Crockett's calm smile was dubbed, "the face of receipts." In Washington, Paul's allies scrambled for damage control. Press releases claimed the audio had been manipulated, but fact-checkers quickly confirmed the tape was authentic. Worse for Paul, other senators quietly distanced themselves, unwilling to be dragged into the storm. Crockett, meanwhile, doubled down. She appeared on primetime news that evening, her voice steady, her message sharp. Transparency matters. If a senator admits behind closed doors that chaos is more important than governing, the American people deserve to know. The clip went viral again. Commentators praised her for turning an attack into a decisive counterstrike. Analysts called it a political masterclass in composure under fire. Rand Paul, once the loudest voice in the room, had been reduced to silence online. His every attempt to push back was drowned out by the roar of Crockett supporters and the avalanche of public backlash. What began as an explosive outburst in a Senate hearing had transformed into a full-blown scandal, one that Crockett now controlled entirely. Within 24 hours, the fallout spread beyond the hearing room. Political talk shows lit up with heated debates. Some hosts replayed the tape every few minutes, dissecting every word Rand Paul had said in that private conversation. Others marveled at Jasmine Crockett's ability to stay calm under pressure. One anchor summed it up bluntly. Paul lost his temper. Crockett kept her cool. And when she pulled out that tape, she didn't just win the exchange, she rewrote the narrative. In Congress, whispers turned into open conversations. A handful of senators publicly criticized Paul, saying his comments showed disrespect for the institution. Behind closed doors, even his allies admitted the scandal had badly damaged his credibility. Meanwhile, Crockett's approval soared. Her staff reported a flood of new support, emails, donations, and volunteers eager to join her cause. Commentators called her the rising star who just cornered one of the Senate's loudest voices. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from ordinary citizens. Viral street interviews showed people shaking their heads at Paul's remarks. One woman laughed, saying, "He tried to embarrass her, and she flipped the script on him." That's what leadership looks like. The narrative was no longer about Paul's insult, it was about Crockett's composure, her evidence, and her ability to turn an attempted takedown into a defining moment. Rand Paul had entered the hearing expecting to dominate. Instead, he had handed Jasmine Crockett the spotlight. And now, the country was watching her every move. Behind the cameras, Rand Paul's world was unraveling. His staff huddled in late-night strategy sessions, trying to craft talking points that could contain the damage. But every draft statement sounded weak compared to the raw clarity of the tape. Advisors urged him to apologize, at least partially, to soften the backlash. But Paul refused. "If I admit anything," he barked, "they'll tear me apart even more." His pride clashed with reality, leaving his team paralyzed. At home, the pressure grew heavier. Donors called non-stop, some furious, others panicked, asking if Paul could survive the wave of public outrage. Pollsters delivered grim news: his approval ratings had dropped sharply in just 2 days. Meanwhile, Crockett's name dominated headlines. Editorials praised her restraint, describing her as a rare voice of discipline in a chamber addicted to theatrics. Clips of her calmly confronting Paul were being taught in communications classes as examples of how to win a debate without raising your voice. Paul, once comfortable in the role of aggressor, now looked cornered. Every attempt he made to speak publicly only reignited the controversy. His anger, once seen as passion, was now viewed as desperation. Late one evening, Paul stared at the television as Crockett appeared on yet another national program, her tone measured, her words sharp. She wasn't just defending herself anymore, she was setting the narrative, framing Paul as the problem. For the first time in his career, Rand Paul wasn't just fighting an opponent in Congress. He was fighting a scandal he couldn't shout his way out of. And Jasmine Crockett was the reason why. While Rand Paul scrambled to contain the fallout, Jasmine Crockett moved with precision. She knew the spotlight was on her, and instead of shrinking from it, she leaned in. her team quickly released a polished statement to the press. This moment is not about personalities, it's about accountability. Leaders must treat the public's trust with respect, not as a stage for theatrics. The message spread like wildfire. What began as a fiery clash now looked like the start of a movement. Crockett framed the scandal as proof that transparency mattered more than ever, and people rallied behind her words. Across the country, grassroots groups began inviting her to speak. Universities asked her to guest lecture. Talk shows fought to book her, knowing every clip of her interviews pulled massive ratings. Even seasoned political analysts admitted something was shifting. Crockett didn't just defend herself, one strategist explained on air. She flipped an attack into a defining moment. That's not survival, that's leadership. Meanwhile, Paul grew quieter. Once a fixture on every camera he could find, he now avoided reporters in the halls, rushing past their questions. Every step he took seemed to fuel the same headline, Rand Paul still dodging tape scandal. Crockett, in contrast, stood taller than ever. Her calm demeanor and sharp delivery had not only humiliated her attacker, it had elevated her into a national figure. And behind the scenes, whispers began to spread. If she could dominate this moment so effortlessly, what might Jasmine Crockett aim for next? In the weeks that followed, the buzz around Jasmine Crockett refused to fade. What started as a viral clip had turned into a defining chapter in her career. Political insiders whispered in back rooms, testing the waters, was Crockett ready for something bigger? Editorial boards hinted at it too. Headlines read, Crockett shows the composure of a future leader, and, is Jasmine Crockett the new face of accountability in Washington? The speculation only fueled her momentum. Meanwhile, Rand Paul's shadow grew darker. His once confident swagger was replaced by clipped responses and tense public appearances. In one press conference, he snapped at a reporter who asked about the tape, storming off before questions were finished. The clip went viral, again, for all the wrong reasons. Crockett, by contrast, moved with ease. She traveled to communities across the country, delivering speeches about truth, responsibility, and the need to restore dignity to politics. Each event drew larger crowds than the last. Supporters carried signs with her name, some even chanting slogans that sounded less like congressional support and more like the beginnings of a national campaign. Behind the scenes, influential donors began reaching out. Offers of support arrived daily. Her team, once small and scrappy, now fielded calls from strategists eager to join. The clash with Rand Paul was no longer just a scandal, it was a launchpad. Crockett had taken a senator's attempt to humiliate her and turned it into the biggest political turning point of her career. And though she never said it outright, the idea hung in the air like static electricity. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just fighting in Congress anymore. She was preparing for something much larger. The whispers turned into expectations, and Jasmine Crockett knew it was time to act. Rather than let speculation control her story, she stepped into the national arena on her own terms. She announced a primetime speech, broadcast live across major networks. The title alone set the tone, Truth Over Theater, a call for accountability. When she took the stage, the room was electric. Supporters filled the seats, reporters packed the aisles, and millions tuned in from home. Crockett stood at the podium, calm as ever, her voice carrying with quiet strength. This is not about me and one senator, she began. This is about a culture of politics that rewards outrage instead of solutions, chaos instead of clarity. That must end. And it starts with us demanding better. The crowd erupted in applause. Online, hashtags surged once again, this time not about Paul's scandal, but about Crockett's vision. She outlined a new initiative, legislation requiring greater transparency in congressional proceedings, including stricter rules around conflicts of interest and deliberate obstruction. She framed it as a blueprint for restoring trust. Pundits called it a stroke of genius. Not only had Crockett turned her viral moment into a rallying cry, but she had also provided a concrete path forward. It wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration that she was stepping into the role of a national leader. Meanwhile, Rand Paul was nowhere to be seen. His office released a half-hearted statement dismissing Crockett's speech as grandstanding, but even his supporters admitted it fell flat. The contrast couldn't have been sharper, Paul shrinking in the shadows, Crockett standing in the spotlight, her message resonating across the nation. And for the first time, commentators said it out loud, Jasmine Crockett isn't just surviving in Washington, she's building the foundation for a future bid at even higher office. Rand Paul's allies were running out of patience. A handful of his closest supporters banded together, determined to drag Jasmine Crockett down before her momentum grew unstoppable. They launched coordinated attacks on television, accusing her of grandstanding for attention and weaponizing private conversations. One senator even sneered during a press appearance, she's just chasing headlines, not solutions. But Crockett was ready. Each time a new attack surfaced, she countered with evidence, facts, and her trademark composure. She didn't raise her voice once, she didn't need to. Instead, she let the hypocrisy of her critics unravel in real time. On one occasion, when a Paul ally claimed her proposed legislation was impossible to enforce, Crockett calmly read from their own past speeches where they had once called for similar reforms. The audience gasped. The senator stammered. The clip went viral within the hour. The more they attacked, the more Crockett's star rose. Her supporters pointed out that the backlash only proved her point, that the old guard feared accountability. Hashtags like #TheyFearCrockett and #TruthOverTheater dominated timelines. Meanwhile, Paul himself grew quieter. Every attempt by his allies to defend him only reminded the public of the tape. His name had become synonymous with the very dysfunction Crockett was now campaigning to fix. By trying to bury her momentum, Paul's camp had unintentionally built her an even bigger platform. Crockett wasn't just winning battles in Congress anymore, she was winning the public narrative. And with every attack she dismantled, more Americans began to see her not just as a defender, but as a leader. By now, Jasmine Crockett was more than just a viral figure, she was a force. The scandal that began with Rand Paul's explosion had grown into a political earthquake that no one in Washington could ignore. Endorsements began rolling in. Local leaders across the country, from mayors to state representatives, voiced support for her accountability initiative. Even a few high-profile figures within her own party hinted that she represented the next generation of leadership. Rallies followed. What started as town halls turned into packed arenas, with thousands showing up to hear her speak. Supporters waved signs that read, "Truth over Theater," and "Crockett for the People." The energy was electric, more like a presidential campaign stop than a congressional event. Behind the scenes, party leaders were taking notes. Some privately admitted that Crockett's rise was the kind of authentic surge they hadn't seen in years. She was young, fearless, and, most importantly, she had proven she could withstand the fire of public attack and turn it into strength. Rand Paul, meanwhile, had faded almost entirely from the spotlight. His name still trended, but not for the reasons he wanted. Commentators used him as the cautionary tale, lose your temper, lose your narrative. Crockett's rise wasn't just a personal victory anymore. It was shifting conversations about the future of the party, the tone of national politics, and even the kind of leaders Americans wanted. And though she remained careful not to make any grand announcements, whispers turned into open speculation. Was Jasmine Crockett setting the stage for a run at the highest office in the land? It was only a matter of time before the whispers turned into direct questions. During a primetime interview, a well-known anchor leaned in and asked what the entire nation had been waiting to hear. "Congresswoman Crockett, your rallies are drawing crowds like a national campaign. Your message is resonating across the country. So let me ask you directly, are you considering a run for president?" The studio went silent. Cameras zoomed in on Crockett's face, searching for the slightest flicker of surprise. But she stayed calm, just as she had during that fateful Senate hearing. She smiled, pausing long enough to let the weight of the moment sink in. "I'll say this," she replied. I'm committed to fighting for accountability and truth, no matter the stage. Right now, that means Congress. But if the people believe my voice belongs somewhere else, I will listen." The audience erupted in applause. Online, the clip spread instantly, sparking headlines: "Crockett doesn't rule out presidential bid." Political analysts pounced. Some called her answer a masterclass in keeping the door open. Others argued it was the closest thing yet to an announcement. Across social media, supporters flooded timelines with excitement, declaring she was the kind of leader America needed. Meanwhile, Rand Paul's name surfaced again, but only as the backdrop to her rise. Commentators reminded viewers that his failed attack was the very spark that ignited her surge. The irony was brutal. The moment Paul tried to silence her had, in fact, propelled her toward a stage far larger than either of them could have imagined. And now, the question lingered in the air like thunder: was Jasmine Crockett destined to turn humiliation into history by stepping onto the presidential stage? The moment Jasmine Crockett refused to rule out a presidential run, Washington went into overdrive. Within hours, her words dominated headlines, talk shows, and political blogs. Supporters saw her statement as the green light they had been waiting for. Social media exploded with hashtags like #Crockett2028 and #LeaderForThePeople. Grassroots groups began organizing rallies on their own, calling her the voice of a new era. Donations surged again, breaking records her team hadn't even dreamed of. But the excitement also triggered panic among her opponents. Strategists from the opposing party scrambled into late-night meetings, debating how to stop her rise before it became unstoppable. Some argued she was still untested on the national stage. Others admitted, grudgingly, that her authenticity and composure made her a dangerous rival. Rand Paul's allies attempted one last counterattack, releasing clips meant to discredit her. But each attempt fell flat, overshadowed by her growing momentum and the public's memory of Paul's own meltdown. Instead of hurting her, the renewed focus only reminded voters of her most iconic moment, the tape that had humiliated Paul in front of the nation. Inside her own party, the pressure mounted. Senior leaders, once skeptical, now approached her directly. Some urged caution: "Don't move too fast." Others urged ambition: "The timing may never be better." Crockett, however, stayed measured. At a rally shortly after the interview, she addressed the speculation with her signature composure. "I hear the excitement. I feel the momentum. But my mission hasn't changed. I'm here to fight for accountability, for transparency, and for the people. That fight belongs everywhere, no matter the title." The crowd roared, chanting her name, drowning out even the reporters who tried to press for more. In that moment, it became clear, whether she announced a campaign tomorrow or years from now, Jasmine Crockett had already stepped into the role of a national leader. And Washington was bracing itself for what came next. The ripple effects of Jasmine Crockett's rise spread far beyond Washington. Across the country, a new wave of candidates announced campaigns for local and state offices, proudly declaring themselves part of the "Truth Over Theater" movement. They cited Crockett's composure and courage as their inspiration. Young activists flooded town halls, energized by the idea that politics didn't have to be dominated by shouting matches and staged theatrics. For them, Crockett had become proof that dignity and discipline could win in the age of viral moments. Party strategists noticed. They began reshaping campaign strategies around her style: calm but sharp, firm but never rattled. What once looked like a single viral confrontation was now evolving into a model for a new generation of politics. Meanwhile, Rand Paul's world shrank. His donor base dried up. His media invitations, once endless, slowed to a trickle. Reporters no longer asked about his policies, only about the tape and the scandal that refused to fade. His colleagues, weary of the constant baggage, quietly excluded him from key negotiations. At one press conference, Paul tried to shift the conversation back to policy, but the first question from a reporter cut him down instantly. "Senator, do you regret the way you handled Congresswoman Crockett?" The silence that followed said everything. Paul's authority had eroded. His attempt to humiliate her had ended up humiliating himself, permanently. Crockett, on the other hand, stood taller with every passing day. She wasn't just winning applause in Congress, she was building a movement that stretched across states, parties, and generations. What began as one senator's explosion had ignited a fire that was now reshaping the entire political landscape. And for Rand Paul, there was no escaping the bitter truth: the more Crockett's star rose, the smaller his own light became. Months after that explosive Senate hearing, the transformation was undeniable. Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman, she had become a national figure, a symbol of accountability in an era defined by political theater. The climax came at a nationally televised rally in front of tens of thousands. The crowd filled a massive arena, chanting her name before she even stepped on stage. When she appeared, the noise was deafening. Signs reading, "Truth over Theater," and "Crockett for the People," waved in unison, the energy surging like a tidal wave. She stood at the podium, calm as ever, and delivered the speech that sealed her place in history. "This movement was never about me. It was about us. About a nation tired of leaders who perform for cameras while ignoring the people they serve. We are here to end the theatrics, end the chaos, and bring back truth, dignity, and accountability to the heart of our democracy." The crowd roared, tears in some eyes, hope in others. Commentators called it the speech of a generation. Meanwhile, Rand Paul's name barely made the news anymore. When it did, it was usually attached to phrases like "once influential" or "weakened by scandal." His legacy was no longer fiery independence, it was the meltdown that catapulted Jasmine Crockett into the national spotlight. The irony was complete. The man who tried to silence her had instead amplified her voice to the entire nation. His explosion had become her ignition. His humiliation had become her ascension. As Crockett raised her fist to thunderous applause, the message was clear: she hadn't just survived the confrontation, she had transformed it into a movement that would shape the future of American politics. Rand Paul's moment of rage was forgotten. Jasmine Crockett's moment of strength would be remembered forever.